Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging into a stack of materials you've shared with us, all centered around herbal medicines and various compounds. And we're looking at them with a specific lens, right? How they might intersect with something many people experience: tinnitus.
That's right. We've got a fascinating mix here, everything from, formal clinical studies and meta-analyses to details on traditional uses and even lists of ingredients from commercial products.
So our mission today is to sift through all this, pulling out the most important insights and maybe some surprising facts that can help you get a clearer picture.
And it is a complex landscape, you're right. The sources point out something immediately striking. These herbal medicines are incredibly popular globally. Sales are way up, according to WHO data mentioned in one paper.
Right.
But at the same time, that same source highlights a real lack of regulation and post-marketing surveillance in many places.
And didn't it also mention that patients often don't even tell their doctors they're using these things?
Exactly, which immediately signals, we're dealing with an area that's widely used, but comes with pretty significant questions around safety, evidence, and how it all fits into regular healthcare.
Absolutely. It really sets the stage for a deep dive that's not just about what these things might do, but also about that bigger picture potential benefit, sure,
Yeah.
but also some really important cautions.
Precisely. Navigating both sides.
Okay, let's unpack this stack then. Where do we start with the material you've provided? What stands out?
Well, one name comes up multiple times and seems particularly relevant to tinnitus based on the data you shared: Ginkgo biloba.
Ginkgo. Yeah, that's a name most people probably recognize.
Yeah.
What did the research in these specific sources find about it for tinnitus?
Okay, so digging into the clinical data here, one meta-analysis included in the material really stood out. It suggests that Ginkgo biloba, specifically the well-studied extract known as EGB 761, well, it demonstrated superior results for tinnitus compared to placebo.
Superior results. That's quite strong language coming from a meta-analysis.
It is. It implies a consistent effect across multiple studies that were pooled together. So that's a significant clinical finding presented right there in these sources.
Okay, so what exactly is ginkgo and this EGD 761 extract? What's in it that might be doing the work?
Ginkgo biloba itself, the plant, is described in a botanical context here as a perennial East Asian herb. The EGB 761 is a specific, standardized extract.
Standardized meaning?
Meaning it's prepared in a way to ensure consistent levels of certain active compounds. It's the form used in many of the clinical studies referenced in our sources.
Got it. And the compounds?
This EGB 761 extract is noted to contain things called flavonoid aglycones. Key ones mentioned are quercetin, kaempferol, and isohametin. These are part of a, broader group of bioactive flavonoids found in the extract.
Okay, so it's these flavonoids and maybe other components in that specific extract that are thought to be the active players. But the million-dollar question, right, how might it work for something as, tricky as tinnitus? Do the sources explain the mechanism for tinnitus?
Yeah, that's where the sources provided are a bit indirect when it comes to tinnitus itself. They don't explicitly lay out the precise mechanism by which ginkgo helps tinnitus. However, they do discuss several effects of ginkgo extract observed in studies on other conditions, particularly neurological or vascular ones. And these effects could offer clues, about its potential activity.
Okay, interesting. What kind of effects are discussed in these other contexts that might, shed some light here?
For example, ginkgo comes up in discussions about potential neuroprotective effects. Think conditions like glaucoma, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease.
Neuroprotection.
Yeah, and the suggested mechanisms in those studies include protecting against oxidative stress, basically, neutralizing those damaging molecules called reactive oxygen species, or ROS. That's also noted as a property of its flavonoid components, their antioxidant capacity.
Oxidative stress and neuroprotection.
I could see how that might relate to protecting the delicate auditory pathways involved in tinnitus. Potentially, yes. The sources also touch upon other mechanisms explored in neurological research, like anti-amyloid aggregation effects, which are relevant to conditions like Alzheimer's.
Right.
They also note that in some studies, ginkgo extracts have been found to increase levels of certain neurotransmitters, acetylcholine, dopamine, 5-hydroxytryptamine, and can inhibit the enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine.
Neurotransmitter effects.
Yeah.
That could certainly play a role in how the brain processes sound or perhaps perceives those phantom sounds in tinnitus.
Could be. And another major area the sources linked to ginkgo is its vascular effects. It's discussed in the context of improving blood flow and causing vasodilation, widening blood vessels. One source even mentions an anti-vasospasmic effect, preventing vessel spasms.
Okay, so we're seeing potential links to neuroprotection, maybe neurotransmitter balance, and improved blood flow. While the sources don't draw a direct line from these to tinnitus, you can kind of see how effects like, say, improving circulation to the inner ear or protecting auditory nerves could be relevant theoretically.
Exactly. It's like piecing together potential clues from different parts of the research landscape presented in these sources. These findings from other areas provide, well, biological plausibility for why ginkgo might be looked at for tinnitus, even if the sources don't nail down the exact cause and effect for this condition.
So the meta-analysis gives the clinical outcome hint, and these other studies offer potential pathways.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay. Now, shifting gears a bit. The sources also mention another specific product combination that had some interesting results.
Yes, MemoViger 2. This product gets highlighted because of a specific randomized controlled trial, an RCT, that used it. The details are in your material.
An RCT, okay. What did that study find?
So this trial had 240 participants. Half got MemoViger 2, half got a placebo. The source states that taking 900 milligrams of MemoViger 2 once a day showed a significant improvement in recent onset tinnitus over 8 weeks compared to the placebo group.
A significant improvement in an RCT. For recent onset tinnitus specifically. That sounds important. What's actually in MemoViger 2? The sources list the ingredients pretty extensively, don't they?
They do, yeah. The source gives a detailed breakdown. It's got Ginkgo biloba at 3%, bilberry at 1%.
Bilberry, okay.
Yeah.
That was on our list too.
Yeah.
Sometimes called blueberry extract, right?
Correct. The sources mention that too. Then there are phospholipids that includes things like phosphatidylserine, phosphatidylethanolamine, phosphatidylcholine, and phosphatidylиnositol.
A whole complex of those.
Exactly. Plus a range of vitamins, B1, B6, B12, C, and E, and minerals. Selenium, magnesium listed as magnesium oxide, and potassium as potassium gluconate, and also L-acetylcarnitine.
Wow, that's quite a blend. Anything else?
It also mentions linoleic acid, which presumably ties into the evening primrose oil mentioned in other documents, though it's listed separately here as a component.
So a real mix. Ginkgo, bilberry, phospholipids, vitamins, minerals, carnitine.
Yes. And the source specifically notes that this combination includes that bilberry dry extract alongside the ginkgo. And it suggests that the significant improvement seen in the study implies bilberry contributes to the positive outcome.
But there's a but here, isn't there?
There is. The source also explicitly states that bilberry's individual contribution cannot be isolated from these sources. It was tested as part of the whole combination.
Right. So we know the blend seemed to work in that trial for recent onset tinnitus, and bilberry is flagged as a likely contributor. But the sources don't really dig into how each ingredient specifically helps tinnitus or how they might work together synergistically in this product for this condition.
That's a key point, yes. The sources give us the ingredient list and the positive trial result for the combined product. We can, speculate based on what we know about some components, the ginkgo possibilities we discussed, maybe antioxidant effects from vitamin C and E, the roles of B vitamins or magnesium in nerve function, but the sources themselves do not provide specific studies or mechanisms for the other components regarding tinnitus. Nor do they detail how all these pieces interact synergistically within MemoViger 2 to get that result. The benefit is presented as coming from that unique combination.
Even if the precise why for every single part working for tinnitus isn't spelled out in the text provided.
Exactly right. That helps clarify what the sources do and don't tell us here. We have a specific combination product that showed promise in one trial, but the granular detail on each ingredient's exact role in that mix for tinnitus isn't in this material.
Okay, that makes sense. It highlights that sometimes research focuses on the whole formulation.
Mm-hmm.
What about other compounds mentioned in the sources you provided? Any others linked, even traditionally, to tinnitus, or maybe related issues like hearing?
Yes. A few others pop up. Lycium chainense, for instance. This appears in a botanical dictionary context.
Lycium chainense, what's the connection?
It's noted as traditionally used to improve things like blurred vision, failing eyesight, dizziness, tinnitus, and wasting conditions.
Tinnitus is right there on the list.
It is. So this indicates a historical association in traditional medicine. But importantly, the sources provide no modern study details, no constituent analysis related to this use, and no proposed mechanisms, just that traditional mention.
So a traditional pointer, but no clinical evidence presented in the sources you shared for tinnitus. Okay.
What else? Resveratrol is discussed, but again, in a somewhat different context here.
How so?
It's mentioned for its otoprotective efficacy, basically protecting the ear against hearing loss caused by specific drugs known to be toxic to the ear, like gentamicin and cisplatin.
Ah, drug-induced hearing loss.
Right. The sources describe resveratrol as a phytoalexin with antioxidant and immunomodulatory effects. They suggest mechanisms like scavenging those ROS molecules we mentioned earlier and preventing lipid peroxidation.
So helpful perhaps for preventing damage to hearing cells from certain drugs based on this material, but not directly presented as treating existing tinnitus symptoms in general.
Correct. That's the context given here. Similarly, vitamin C or L-ascorbic acid gets a mention.
And how does that relate?
It was in an in vitro study, so in lab dishes, not people, where it prevented toxicity caused by the drug chloroquine in inner ear glial cells.
Again, protecting auditory cells from drug toxicity.
Exactly. Not presented as a tinnitus treatment broadly within these sources.
Okay, and what about evening primrose oil? That was on our initial list, and it's mentioned in the sources somewhere, right?
It is mentioned, yes. Evening primrose oil is listed along with its main constituents, cis-linoleic acid and gamma-linolenic acid, or GLA. This appears in documents describing product formulations.
But is there any link made to tinnitus?
Critically, no. The sources you shared do not contain any information linking evening primrose oil itself to tinnitus outcomes or research. It's listed as an ingredient in some things, yes, but there's no reported effect on tinnitus in the text provided.
Okay, that's important. Just because it's in the document doesn't mean it's linked to our specific question.
Precisely.
And those other components of MemoViger too, the magnesium, B vitamins, phospholipids, L-acetylcarnitine, potassium, linoleic acid, any individual tinnitus links for them in the sources.
Their main relevance for tinnitus, based only on these sources, is their inclusion in that MemoViger 2 combination that showed positive results in the RCT.
So, part of a successful team, but no individual stats in this report.
Pretty much. The sources don't provide specific studies or mechanisms for their individual effects on tinnitus. We know these ingredients do things physiologically, magnesium in nerve function, B vitamins in metabolism, phospholipids are key for cells. But the sources you shared don't detail their specific contributions or mechanisms for tinnitus as standalone items, or explain how they synergize for this condition within MemoViger 2.
Okay, that really helps clarify the scope of what these sources tell us about the individual ingredients versus the combinations. We've got some promising leads for specific studied preparations like EGB 761 and MemoViger 2, but also quite a few ingredients just listed without specific tinnitus evidence in this material.
And this really brings us back full circle, doesn't it? Back to those crucial cautions and quality issues surrounding herbal medicines in general, which are quite prominent in your sources.
Yes, that regulatory aspect we mentioned at the start, it feels really important to revisit that.
Absolutely. The sources strongly emphasize that these products, often sold as dietary supplements, are generally not regulated with the same strict standards as pharmaceutical drugs, meaning their quality can vary a lot. Investigators have found this repeatedly. The potency might not be consistent batch to batch, or what's on the label might not perfectly match what's actually in the bottle. Furthermore, the sources point out that just because something's been used traditionally for centuries doesn't automatically guarantee safety or efficacy by today's standards. It's certainly not a substitute for rigorous scientific evidence.
Right. Traditional use can be a starting point for research, maybe, but it's not the end point.
Exactly. And there are real risks involved that the sources highlight, potential serious side effects, and, critically, interactions with prescription drugs.
You mentioned examples earlier.
Yes, like St. John's wort affecting the blood thinner warfarin, or garlic potentially interacting with anticoagulants. These interactions are a major concern, especially, as you noted, if patients aren't telling their doctors what supplements they're taking.
That communication gap is huge.
It is. And another significant risk mentioned is contamination or adulteration. This could be heavy metals, maybe toxic ingredients that shouldn't be there, or even products being illegally spiked with actual prescription drugs. This has been found particularly with some imported herbal mixtures.
Wow, that's quite alarming.
It underscores why caution is really necessary. The best advice mentioned in the sources: Try to use products that have actually been tested in clinical trials, like the specific EGB761 extract with that meta-analysis evidence, or the MemoViger 2 combo from the RCT.
But finding that information isn't always easy, right?
Right. The sources acknowledge that finding reliable information and ensuring product quality in such a loosely regulated market can be genuinely challenging for the average person.
Okay, so pulling all of this together from the sources you shared, what's the overall picture? What can we say about these herbal and compound approaches for tinnitus based on this material?
Synthesizing it all, these sources paint a picture with, let's say, some promising specific leads, but these are set against a backdrop of significant general cautions.
Okay, the promising leads being.
Ginkgo biloba, specifically that EGB761 extract. It shows compelling results for tinnitus based on that meta-analysis mentioned. And while the direct mechanism for tinnitus isn't fully laid out, those potential vascular, neuroprotective, and antioxidant properties we discussed offer, plausible biological pathways.
And the combination product.
Yes, the MemoViger 2 combination with Ginkgo, bilberry, and that whole list of other things demonstrated a significant positive effect in that specific RCT for recent-onset tinnitus. This highlights that particular multi-component formulations can be effective, even if the why for each ingredient isn't fully explained in these sources.
Then we add lysine chinense.
Right, with a history of traditional use for tinnitus, but no modern study data provided here. And things like resveratrol and vitamin C were presented more in the context of protecting hearing cells from drug damage rather than treating existing tinnitus symptoms broadly.
And many other compounds, including evening primrose oil, were present in the sources, maybe as ingredients or in botanical lists, but they lacked specific reported links to tinnitus outcomes in the provided text.
Exactly. The key clinical findings presented here really centered on that specific EGB761 extract and the MemoViger 2 combination.
So overall, the sources show potential, especially for those specific, well-studied preparations. But it's heavily qualified by the big issues around the broader herbal market, lack of regulation, variable quality, potential drug interactions, contamination risks.
That sums it up well. It's definitely not a simple picture. It requires careful consideration, being aware of both potential benefits suggested by some studies and the very real limitations and risks inherent in the wider market.
It's certainly not as simple as just picking an herb off the shelf based on a name or an old mention.
No. The sources really emphasize looking for products with actual clinical evidence behind them where possible and being acutely mindful of the risks in this often unregulated space.
Well, we've certainly taken a deep dive into these sources today, pulled out some fascinating points about specific compounds like ginkgo and bilberry in combination, the context of herbal remedies and tinnitus. We saw those promising results for EGB761 and MemoViger 2, learned about potential mechanisms from other related studies, noted the traditional uses.
But also really uncovered that crucial information about the regulatory gaps, the potential for interactions, the quality concerns that you just have to keep in mind with many herbal preparations.
It really highlights the need for discernment, doesn't it, when you're navigating this space?
Absolutely.
So here's a provocative thought to leave you with, based on everything we've explored today from these documents. Given this mix of evidence, some intriguing findings for specific things, but often limited or context-specific, especially when comparing single ingredients to combination products like MemoViger 2, and layering on top those big concerns about quality and regulation in the herbal market. What factors should you prioritize when you're evaluating information about natural approaches for health concerns like tinnitus? How do you personally balance potential benefits suggested by some studies with the absolute need for robust evidence for product quality you can trust and for safety, especially in a landscape that's often much less regulated than conventional medicine? Something to think about.